The woods had always been a kind of refuge for Ethan. He came here when the noise of his life grew too loud, when his partner's silences pressed too heavily, when the small apartment felt like a cage rather than a home. Hiking gave him the illusion of escape, of air in his lungs that didn't carry the stale weight of arguments left unresolved. That afternoon, the forest seemed endless, shadows stretching between the pines like narrow corridors. His boots pressed into damp soil, each step carrying him further from the world he was supposed to belong to. The trail twisted upward, a sharp incline lined with fallen branches. Ethan welcomed the burn in his thighs, the ache in his calves, because it gave his mind something else to focus on besides the words that had lingered from last night. Maybe you don't even want this anymore. He hadn't responded then. He didn't know what to say. Silence had always been easier than honesty. As the path leveled out, a sound cut through the solitude. Hooves against the earth, steady and rhythmic. Ethan slowed, scanning the trees until a figure emerged from the brush, a man astride a chestnut horse, broad shoulders straight beneath a worn jacket. The rider's hat shaded his eyes, but his voice carried clear when he spoke. "Trail ahead gets rough," he called, reins tightening as the horse halted. "You'd be wise not to take it." Ethan stopped, surprised more by the interruption than the warning. "I've managed fine so far," he replied, though the words came out with less confidence than he intended. Sweat beaded along his forehead, and not just from the climb. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, boots crunching against gravel. Dust clung to his jeans, and when he removed his hat, Ethan saw the sun-browned skin of someone who belonged out here far more than he ever could. The stranger's eyes lingered on him with a kind of calm assessment, as though measuring his resolve. "I'm Caleb," the man said, simply, voice low, deliberate. "Been riding these woods since I was a boy. Storms knocked down half the ridge last week, landslides, loose rock. Folks get hurt if they're not careful." There was no arrogance in his tone, only certainty. Ethan found himself nodding, though stubbornness tugged at him. He hated being told what to do, yet something about Caleb's presence disarmed him. "I didn't realize," Ethan admitted. "I just needed space. I wasn't thinking about the danger." Caleb studied him a moment longer before looping the reins around a branch. "Space is one thing. Getting lost, or worse, is another. There's a safer path that runs west. Takes longer, but it'll get you where you want to go." The offer hung between them, and Ethan's chest tightened unexpectedly. A stranger, and yet he already felt a pull, something unspoken that unsettled him more than the warning. He tried to shake it off. "And where exactly am I going?" he asked, half smiling, trying to mask the unease. Caleb's lips curved in the faintest answer, not quite a smile, but close. "That's for you to know. I'm just here to make sure you get there in one piece." They began walking, the horse following obediently behind. The forest seemed different with Caleb beside him, less oppressive, more alive. Birds scattered from branches above, and sunlight broke through in fractured beams. Ethan caught himself glancing sideways, noticing the way Caleb's stride carried an ease born of familiarity, as though every stone and root belonged to him. "You really ride out here alone?" Ethan asked, curious despite himself. "Most days," Caleb answered. "Solitude doesn't bother me. Teaches you what's worth carrying and what you can leave behind." The words struck deeper than Ethan expected. He thought of the apartment again, of the clutter not just in drawers and closets, but in the silence between him and his partner. He wanted to ask Caleb what he carried, what he had left behind, but the question felt too intimate for first meeting. So he kept walking, letting the silence settle around them instead. When the trail narrowed, Caleb placed a steady hand at Ethan's back, guiding him past a fallen log slick with moss. The touch was brief, practical, but Ethan felt it echo long after. He told himself it was nothing, that he was imagining the warmth, the charge. Yet, when their eyes met again, even briefly, there was recognition there. Something unnamed. By the time they reached the fork Caleb had spoken of, the air had grown heavier, clouds gathering over the canopy. The safer path stretched wide and clear, while the other veered sharply upward into shadow. Ethan stared at it, wondering what might have happened if Caleb hadn't appeared. Wondering, too, if he would have cared. Caleb's voice broke the silence. So, what'll it be? Risk or reason? Ethan exhaled slowly, torn between pride and prudence. But his gaze lingered not on the dangerous trail, nor the safer one, but on Caleb. Somehow, it felt like the real choice was standing right beside him. He nodded toward the safer path. Lead the way. And as they moved forward together, Ethan couldn't shake the sense that the true danger wasn't behind them, but just beginning to unfold. The safer trail curved westward, winding through groves of aspen that shimmered in the late afternoon light. Ethan walked beside Caleb, the rhythm of their steps falling into an almost unspoken harmony. What might have been an awkward silence instead carried a strange ease, as though the forest itself absorbed their pauses and gave them back as something softer. "Do you hike often?" Caleb asked after a while, his tone casual, yet carrying genuine interest. "Not as often as I'd like," Ethan admitted. "Life gets in the way." He left the sentence unfinished, unwilling to name the weight pressing at his chest. Caleb nodded as though he understood. "Life always does. Out here, though, it doesn't follow you. That's why I ride. To breathe without carrying anyone else's burden." The words struck Ethan like a confession meant for him alone. He wanted to ask more, what burdens Caleb carried, who had placed them on his shoulders, but he hesitated. He wasn't sure he was ready to hear truths that might mirror his own. The trail narrowed, forcing them close. Caleb moved with an effortless grace, steadying Ethan with a hand whenever loose rock threatened his footing. Each touch lingered longer than necessary, not in boldness, but in quiet reassurance. Ethan told himself it was only practical, yet his heart disagreed, thudding with every brush of skin against fabric. At one steep bend, Ethan stumbled, his boot catching on a root. Caleb caught his arm swiftly, holding him upright. Their eyes met, Caleb steady, Ethan's unguarded, and for a moment neither moved. The forest hushed around them, branches bending with the breeze, as though waiting. "Careful," Caleb said at last, releasing him gently. "The trail tests you when you're distracted." Ethan's cheeks warmed. "Guess I'm guilty of that." The conversation deepened as they pressed on. Caleb spoke of ranch life, of long days spent under relentless sun, of nights where silence stretched wider than the horizon. Ethan listened, drawn in not only by the cadence of his voice, but by the solitude he described. It sounded achingly familiar. "My partner thinks I come out here just for exercise," Ethan admitted, quietly surprising himself. "Truth is, I come because I don't know how else to feel whole." Caleb glanced at him, eyes narrowing slightly with understanding. "Then maybe you're not looking for exercise. Maybe you're looking for yourself." The words hung between them like a truth too sharp to grasp. Ethan swallowed, his throat dry, and turned his gaze back to the path. Later, they stopped beside a stream cutting across the trail. Caleb tethered his horse and crouched at the bank, cupping water into his palms. Ethan joined him, their shoulders brushing as they drank. The stream's cold rush filled the silence, yet the closeness was louder. "You remind me of someone I once knew," Caleb murmured almost to himself. "Someone you cared about?" Ethan asked before he could stop the words. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Someone I shouldn't have cared about, but I did." He didn't elaborate, and Ethan didn't push. Still, the implication stirred something dangerous, recognition perhaps, or warning. They sat together on a fallen log, droplets from the stream glistening on their skin. Ethan's chest rose and fell, with a rhythm that no longer belonged solely to him. He felt the tug of two lives, the one waiting for him at home, routine and safe, and the one flickering here in the woods, raw and undeniable. Caleb shifted, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "You ever wonder," he said slowly, "why we meet the people we meet? Why some cross our path just once, but leave marks we can't shake?" Ethan's breath caught. He wanted to deny it, to claim chance was meaningless, but he couldn't. "All the time," he whispered. The admission left him exposed, yet also strangely free. Caleb turned, eyes holding his for a beat longer than was proper. It was not an advance, not yet, but the current between them thickened, undeniable. As the sun dipped lower, they rose to continue. Their hands brushed as they started up the trail again. This time, neither pulled away immediately. Ethan's pulse quickened, and a thought pressed at the edges of his mind. The true danger wasn't the broken ridge or the wilderness. It was walking this path beside Caleb, knowing each step carried them closer to something he might not be able to turn back from. By the time the forest thinned, the air had shifted. Clouds gathered above, heavy and dark, as though the sky itself mirrored the weight building inside Ethan. He walked on, heart torn, yet unable to resist the pull that had already begun to lead him astray. The clouds that had shadowed the horizon finally broke. Rain fell in a sudden downpour, heavy enough to blur the path ahead and drench the soil beneath their boots. Ethan lifted his hand against the torrent, blinking through the sheets of water. "There's a cabin nearby," Caleb shouted above the storm, motioning toward a break in the trees. "Old Hunter's shelter. We'll wait it out." They hurried together, the horse trailing close, mud sucking at their steps. The cabin appeared like something conjured from memory. Weathered planks, a sagging roof, yet still standing against the storm. Caleb pushed open the door, guiding Ethan inside before tying the horse beneath the overhang. Within, the air was damp and cool, shadows stretching across bare walls. Ethan shivered, water running down his arms as he peeled off his soaked jacket. Caleb entered soon after, shutting the door against the roar of the rain. Silence swelled, broken only by the drip of water from their clothes and the thunder rolling overhead. "You're freezing," Caleb said, his voice lower now, no longer fighting the storm. He pulled off his own jacket, then crouched to strike a match against the stone hearth. Sparks caught, small flames rising from a handful of dry kindling. Warmth crept into the room, faint but steady. Ethan crouched beside him, drawn by both the fire and the man tending it. Their shoulders touched, and neither shifted away. The heat between them had little to do with the flames. "You didn't have to lead me this far," Ethan murmured. His voice trembled more than he intended. Caleb's gaze flickered toward him. "Maybe I wanted to." The words landed heavy, heavier than the rain outside. Ethan's breath caught, his chest tightening with all the things he shouldn't feel, but did. He thought of his partner at home, the arguments, the distance, the comfort of familiarity, but those memories blurred beneath the immediacy of Caleb's presence. The fire crackled. Lightning flared beyond the shuttered window. Caleb's hand moved, almost hesitant, brushing a strand of damp hair from Ethan's forehead. His fingers lingered, warm against cold skin. Ethan's eyes closed at the touch, a surrender disguised as stillness. "This is dangerous," Ethan whispered. "I warned you about dangerous trails," Caleb replied. The kiss, when it came, was inevitable. Gentle at first, then deepening with urgency neither could contain. Ethan clutched at Caleb's shirt, the taste of rain still on his lips, every part of him burning with the sudden release of restraint. Guilt threaded through the passion, sharp and undeniable. Yet it didn't stop him. It only reminded him of the risk, of the line already crossed. They pulled apart briefly, breathing ragged, eyes searching. Caleb's voice was hoarse. "Tell me to stop and I will." Ethan's silence was the answer. He leaned in again, closing the distance with a choice he couldn't undo. Time blurred in the cabin, thunder outside, heat inside, two men caught in a storm that had little to do with the weather. The world beyond those walls ceased to matter. All that existed was touch, need, and the ache of something both forbidden and undeniable. When at last the storm quieted, the silence that followed was heavier than before. Ethan sat against the wall, chest heaving, Caleb beside him. Their hands rested close, not quite touching. The fire had burned low, casting shadows that seemed to echo their own uncertainty. Ethan spoke first, voice raw. "I shouldn't have." Caleb cut him off gently. "You did. So did I. We can't take it back." Guilt pressed harder now, curling in Ethan's gut. He imagined returning home, the familiar apartment, his partner's expectant glance. He felt both dread and longing, dread for the lies he would carry, longing for the freedom he'd tasted here. Caleb looked at him, eyes steady but touched with regret. "The trail was dangerous. I warned you. Didn't think I'd be part of it." The words hung between them like the echo of thunder, soft but unshakable. Ethan couldn't answer. He only knew the truth of it. The danger had never been the trail, nor the storm, but the choices he'd made in the quiet that followed. When the rain eased, they left the cabin together. The forest glistened, cleansed by the downpour, but Ethan felt no such clarity. Every step back, toward the world, beyond the trees, carried the weight of what had passed. He didn't look back at the cabin. He didn't need to. The memory would follow him, as inescapable as his own shadow. And as the sky cleared, Ethan realized some trails didn't end where the path grew safe. Some followed you long after the journey was done. The storm had passed, but its weight lingered. The forest smelled of rain and earth, sharp and clean, though Ethan felt anything but renewed. He and Caleb walked in silence, boots sinking softly into the wet soil, the horse trailing behind with quiet patience. Every step carried Ethan farther from the cabin, yet closer to the life he had abandoned only hours before. The safer path widened until the trees thinned, revealing a ridge where the valley stretched below. Mist curled through the lowlands, and beyond it, the faint outline of roads and rooftops whispered of return. Ethan stopped, staring at the view as if searching for answers among the shifting fog. Caleb halted beside him. "This is where I turn back," he said simply. His voice carried no accusation, only inevitability. Ethan's chest tightened. He had known this moment was coming, yet it still cut deeper than he expected. "So that's it?" he asked, not hiding the ache in his tone. Caleb studied him with eyes that held more tenderness than Ethan felt he deserved. "It was never going to be more than this," he said. "You've got someone waiting for you. I can't be the reason you lose yourself." The words stung because they were true. Ethan thought of his partner, of the silence at the breakfast table, of nights spent back-to-back in bed, but also of the years they had shared, the history that bound them. That loyalty clashed against the memory of Caleb's touch, the fire they had kindled together in the storm. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," Ethan admitted, voice raw. Caleb shifted, resting one hand on the horse's reins, the other brushing lightly against Ethan's arm. "You already know. You just don't want to say it out loud." Ethan met his gaze, searching for something he couldn't name, permission, absolution, maybe even hope. But Caleb's expression remained steady, unyielding. He was offering no promises, no future, only the truth of what they had shared and the burden of what came next. For a long moment, neither moved. The wind stirred the wet leaves, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Ethan wanted to reach for him again, to hold onto what felt alive and undeniable. Yet even as the urge burned, he knew the moment was ending. Caleb finally released a slow breath. "Take care of yourself, Ethan. And be careful which trails you choose next time." The echo of those words, his first warning, now doubled in meaning, settled heavily between them. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. His throat closed around everything he wanted to say, but couldn't. Gratitude, longing, regret. Caleb swung into the saddle with practiced ease, the horse shifting beneath him. For a heartbeat, Ethan thought he might ride away without another glance. But Caleb turned once more, eyes locking with his, and in that final look was everything they hadn't spoken: desire, sorrow, and the quiet acceptance that some connections, no matter how fierce, cannot stay. Then he was gone, the sound of hooves fading into the trees until only silence remained. Ethan stood alone at the ridge, mist curling around his feet. The valley below called him back to his life, to the partner who didn't know what had happened, to the choices he would now have to carry like stones in his chest. He felt heavier and lighter all at once, weighted by guilt, yet awakened by something he hadn't realized he was starving for. He began the descent slowly, each step deliberate. The trail no longer felt safe or dangerous. It felt inevitable, a road he had to walk, whether he was ready or not. The memory of Caleb clung to him, not just as a moment of weakness, but as a mirror, reflecting the hunger he'd hidden, the truths he'd denied. By the time the forest gave way to open ground, Ethan knew his life would never fit back into the neat borders he had left behind. The storm had shifted more than the sky. It had shifted him, and though he would return to the world waiting at the bottom of the trail, a part of him would always remain in the woods, where danger had found him, where a cowboy's warning had become prophecy, and where he had learned that the most treacherous paths are not carved by storms, but by the heart itself,